Okay, we are back in session. We will be moving to item 7.3.
Shandy Wick City Clerk, item 7.3, award contract for the abatement of nuisances related to property maintenance for properties within the city limits of Salina for a period of April 1, 2020 through March 31, 2021.
Okay, I take it you're not Sean.
No, I'm not, actually. It's his anniversary, so
Okay.
I told him he could go home, and as long as he went and got curbside for me, brought it so I could eat, and then I'm here to talk to you. So
Okay.
we've had a system tonight. As some of you may be aware, we have an annual abatement contract. I know, and having listened to the meeting earlier, we're looking at expenses and issues related to costs, though I do think this is one worth pursuing. This annual contract is a budgeted and allotted amount of money that we set aside in the budget for the department to handle the abatement of nuisances related to code compliance and neighborhood services. So junk, trash, mowing, grass, weeds, those types of things are common issues. $50,000 is set aside annually, but we don't necessarily use all of that. So the contract you're approving here is essentially you're approving somebody to do the work at a certain set rate, and then we'll use that money throughout the year. But if we don't use it all, it actually goes back to the general fund. So with that being said, there are some statistics here related to 2019's code enforcement. Number of complaints we received last year included 2,961 complaints. We have both staff and citizen initiated. Sometimes people call noting things. Other times our officers are out kind of rotating neighborhoods. They have areas that they frequent. And what you'll see, and I think it's an interesting statistic, is the number of inspections, re-inspections, and follow-up tasks performed. They're considerably higher than the amount of complaints and the amount of violation notices and the amount of abatements ordered. And that's because we really try to get compliance through working with people, but it takes a lot of people work to get us there. But in those worst case scenarios where we're not able to do that, we do need to use the abatement contract and have somebody out take care of this work. As I mentioned, this type of work varies. Typically in the summer, which are our high peak times, you'll possibly have 10 to 15 work orders that week, mainly mowing. We saw some really interesting high peaks last year with the very rainy spring we had. You'll also note attached in the packet is the bid packet that went out and then the two corresponding contracts. And the contractors have identified their individual prices related to both the types of services, number or fee for going to the landfill, plus the landfill fee, and specialized equipment. The two bidders we had this year were from Laux Home Repair and Unified Field Services. You'll see in the packet that they're very similar rates for many of the services, though the most distinguishing factor is the additional charges listed by Laux Home Repair, which is allowed by the bid, related to using a certain type of tractor, heavy truck, skid loader, has an hourly rate, where Unified Field Services did not have an hourly rate with that, only going by their established fees for services. We have had experience as a city working with Laux Home Repair, and they have been awarded the nuisance abatement contract in the past, have performed to the specifications, and are in good standing. Unified Field Services, Inc. is a national company, has provided numerous references from cities across the country. Staff has contacted those references as well as the subcontractors that they identified they would be using to perform the work in this area. As I mentioned, we have $50,000 a year budgeted for this. In addition to the costs that are associated, we get directly from the contractor. There is an administrative fee that is charged to the property owners who do not pay their abatement fee, and it then ends up becoming a lien on their taxes. Something that we did note in here due to COVID-19 is Unified Field Services is a national organization. The two subcontractors they indicated were in the Wichita and Kansas City areas. And our concern is that related to travel restrictions, they might not be able to come to the area. And so our suggestion at this time would be to award the nuisance abatement contract to Laux Home Repair for the amount indicated in the bid tabulation summary and contract documents for the period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021, and authorize the mayor to sign that contract for services. You do have another option, and that is to award the nuisance abatement contract to Unified Field Services, Inc. for the amounts indicated in the bid tabulation summary and the contract documents for the period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021, and authorize the mayor to sign the contract for services. And of course, lastly, you have the right to decline the award and award a bid at this time and direct staff to republish bids at a later date.
Commissioners, if I may, Mike Scragg, you do have the authority within the purchasing policy to determine that it's in the best interest of the city or the organization to award something to other than the low bidder. We had conversation. I'm supportive of the recommendation. In fact, it was my recommendation just we started the conversation somewhat before the coronavirus hit and had just general concerns about awarding a contract that then is going to have subcontractors, and those subcontractors are going to be in other communities, and just the response time and the interchangeability of subcontractors. Then you add on to that the travel restrictions, as Ms. Driscoll mentioned, and that's what kind of culminated in our recommendation that as an overall expenditure, it hasn't been that much in years past, so the incremental difference between the two bids probably isn't that much. And in terms of reliability and responsiveness and being able to get the work done when we need it, we just felt like now might not be the time to go out on a limb and make a transition to the format that United has proposed.
Commissioner Davis, did United Field Services offer a plan as to how they would be responsive to your needs if their closest subcontractor was 100 miles away? Well, and before, just so I don't have to say my name again, if they needed a tractor or a front-end loader, would they bring their own, or do they rent one here locally and that pass the cost on to us, or how are they? Because those are the two big differences in the equipment between the two companies.
Agreed. Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community and Development Services. Not necessarily speaking negative about United Field Services, it's just there were a lot of gaps in kind of the questions when they asked, well, we would just make that equipment available. I'm not sure what that means. And I think if it were maybe just Wichita, that's, an hour's drive, you may have enough kind of clients in this community area to kind of be able to spread that work out. But as I mentioned, we have 10 to 15 cases a week in which need abatement services during our peak times. That is a lot of running back and forth to Wichita. And if we're talking all the way out of Kansas City, 3-hour drive, I'm not opposed to trying it. And I was trying to kind of look at these numbers because we could have significantly less costs. But our question was at what service level? And with everything going on right now, that's just a lot of uncertainty to kind of try in these times. They did provide us, one of the things in the contract is we have the right to call subcontractors, ask them, interview them. It's not anything that they said that was wrong. I mean, they're clearly able to provide the service. Just the question is, are you able to provide the service at the level and kind of the timing of our area? Those are some pretty far commute times.
Yeah. Mayor Hoppick here. We talk about the cost, but this really will not be a cost to the city because these are fees that will be added to the property owner's tax statement and paid by the taxpayer. So I just want people to realize that we're talking about a $50,000 budget here, and we're talking about different items. But again, this is not a cost to the city. And again, the thing that concerns me would be the timeliness of what we're trying to get done here. So.
Commissioner Franz, I had the same concerns that Commissioner Davis did. I couldn't figure out because they have missing equipment, and I know full well sometimes these are not pristine areas to clean, and you have hazards, and you need heavy equipment sometimes. So I was wondering how they were going to deal with that. The other concern is, as you say, if they have to come back and forth repeatedly, daily, how are, they're not driving just automobiles, they're driving trucks pulling equipment. It's not 50 cents a mile to get from Wichita to here, and those circumstances, is how do they do that within the confines of their, could the subcontractors then subcontract their work to other local contractors under the United Field Services bid? I mean, that occurred to me as a workaround that they might do, and I'm not sure that we want that,
Lauren Driscoll, Director of Community Development Services. I agree. I think one of the things that this has brought to light for us is that this is a new option. We've never had somebody bid like this before. And our bid specs don't really speak to this type of bidder. And so at this point, I think there's a lot of good reason that we're recommending Laux as our bidder. And what I would like to prepare for is next year when we go to put our bid out, that we specifically address somebody who may bid with this type of business model and just ask for additional details. If you do have subcontractors, verifying that there are no additional subcontractors, and if you have people at a certain distance, how do you plan on, providing, turnaround time, within X amount of hours, those types of things, and maybe asking for more specifics where we haven't gotten those in the past.
Mayor Hoppick, who do we currently have?
We are currently using Laux. Traditionally, we've
Is
used
it
Laux and Ponton.
Okay, that's going to say pause. That's
Often
why
throughout the last years.
I was wondering, because it seemed like we've had 2 local bids before, and so I was kind of surprised to just see 1 local bid and 1 out of territory. Any other questions for?
Commissioner Franz, again, and looking at some of the background information, it looks like the average fee for an actual cleanup is somewhere in the order of $125 a piece for what we actually have to do.
And like I said, we try really hard. Mayor Hoppick is correct that, ideally, those funds are getting paid back. But we try to be very conscious of the fact that sometimes people just are in a hardship themselves, and we try really hard to work through things with them to help them clean up the property, connect them with service groups. But sometimes just stuff has to be abated, and if it's going to be abated, we work really hard to make sure we're getting people the best price possible. So it is what it is, but it's a necessary service for sure.
Mike Sprague, City Manager, just as a point of clarification, you're correct, the average fee is probably $125. There is an administrative fee that we also collect for staff time and mailings and certified mail and recordings, and that's around $125 as well.
But typically, the average size lawn that we have to mow is about $125. And a lot of times, if the first time, you don't get the administrative fee. If this keeps happening all summer long, that's when it's like, you kind of got your first get out of jail free card. If you can't, then there's an administrative fee to this, so.
Commissioner Davis, so on the $25,000 that was spent last year, was a certain percentage of that recouped from the property owners, or is that the net expense we had after we received payment from the property owner?
What I can tell you is that $25,000 is what we spent out in the contract. And it gets a little lost, because if those funds, once they're charged, they go through the lien process most of the time. I think very rarely do people actually pay their abatement costs. So a lot of times it gets liened, and knowing what comes back, it has to go through taxes with the county. So a lot of times we don't see that number. So I don't have that number for sure of how much actually was recouped. I could get that for you and prepare that for a future meeting.
But in the long run, 100% of it's recouped.
Yes.
At some point.
At some point.
Yeah, at some point, 100% of it is recouped.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it may
Mike
take a
Sprague,
few
City
years.
Manager, if it remains unpaid, it becomes a lien against the property, a tax lien against the property, and
3
could
years.
force a tax sale.
And that takes about 3 years.
Okay. Do we have anyone on the line that would
We do
star
not.
9 if you want to talk? Okay. There's no one, so I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Commissioner Hodges, I move that we award the nuisance abatement contract to Laux Home Repair for the amounts indicated in the bid tabulation summary and the contract documents for the period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021, and authorize the mayor to sign the contract for services.
Commissioner Ryan, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a motion and a second to approve the nuisance abatement contract to Laux Home and Repair. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to 7.4.
Shandy, you want to announce it?
Item 7.4, resolution number 20-7822, authorizing temporary COVID-19 related personnel manual updates.
Mike Craig, City Manager. I'm repeating myself, but things have been very fluid. In anticipation of a number of different reasons that employees might need to take leave and be told to stay at home if they're symptomatic and other things, as well as in anticipation of the possibility of some type of self-quarantine. The city attorney and the HR director and I started looking at our personnel manual and identifying possible revisions that we thought might be appropriate to account for that. And we were pretty well along in that process, had our thoughts collected at least. And then the Families First Coronavirus Response Act came out and provided the relief and additional guidance and directives. And so that caused us to need to really get a good understanding of that act, then understand how that interrelates with our personnel manual, and how it might be implemented. And as that conversation was going on is when we started seeing communities start to implement 30-day stay-at-home directives. And so I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the Family First Coronavirus Response Act kind of seems to anticipate an 80-hour or a 2-week scenario, and it came out early last week, and so it may not be completely in sync with what we're now seeing as the trend. So I prepared the PowerPoint that I'm going to present to you now because it is very detailed. It's very hard for me to write a staff report to summarize a congressional action of this level. So I'm going to apologize in advance, but I think it was helpful for us as an exercise. It's helpful for me to be sure I'm presenting it to you correctly. And this is the backdrop upon which we really need to make any decisions we might want to make about changes to the personnel manual. So it was adopted March 18th of 2020, and we scrambled around to find an actual copy, not just a summary online somewhere. It has an effective date, a stated effective date of not later than 15 days after enactment. So it could vary, but 15 days is April 2nd. And it has a stated expiration date of the end of this year. It identifies 8 separate divisions. I'm not going to go through every one of those. The ones that are of interest to us are the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, and the tax credits for paid sick and paid family medical leave. So in the interim, I made a determination as related to our sick leave policy and the use of sick leave for child care, and I'll get to that in a second. But our personnel manual currently provides that an employee may use sick leave for personal illness and enforced quarantine of the employee, medical appointments, illness or injury in the employee's family requiring the employee's attendance, and attendance at funerals for members of the employee's family. So it doesn't contemplate a scenario that was imminent for us, and that is a kind of a medical-related school closure that required an employee to be in attendance for their child. The school's not available, daycare's not available anymore, and it's, I wouldn't say it rose to the level of a quarantine, but quarantine was in the conversation. So the policy provides administrative responsibility to the Human Resource Director and the City Manager, and based upon the unique set of circumstances, then what factored into my decision were recommendations of self-quarantine as it relates to coronavirus, the closure of the schools on very short notice related to the COVID-19 concerns, inability of parents to find alternate child care arrangements since the school and child care providers were in flux, the underlying health concerns that related to children and care providers that caused the school closure in the first place. So I made the interim determination and advised employees that they could use their accrued sick leave to offset their absence as related to child care because of the school closure. That now is very consistent with the directive coming out of the Coronavirus Response Act, and is something that we'll get to in terms of our discussion of granting the city manager discretion. I'm taking the divisions a little bit in reverse order. It at least makes sense to me. But as it relates to tax credits for paid sick and paid family medical leave, it provides that there would be allowed a credit against essentially Social Security taxes that an employer would have to pay, and a railroad carrier tax that doesn't apply to us. That if there's a credit, if the employer becomes entitled to a credit that exceeds their quarterly liability, then it's treated as an overpayment and that shall be refunded. So the federal government was setting up, and I'll get into the details of some of this leave and the value of the leave, but they were setting up that they were going to mandate to employers, you need to provide certain forms of leave, and then you can withhold that from your quarterly remittance of Social Security, essentially, and then you can also request refunding of what would be an overpayment or an overcredit. So they have this mechanism in place where the leave specified by the Act is ultimately reimbursed by the federal government. But this credit does not apply to any state or political subdivision thereof. So as the city of Salina, we are a political subdivision, and that exemption applies to us. Now, I would tell you that there's been conversation, and I've seen confirmation that as part of this Stimulus Act, addressing that is part of the conversation. I don't know, I believe it's in at least some of the proposals, but I don't know the status of it. So there's the possibility that that'll get changed and amended and we'll become eligible for the credit. The other thing that I would tell you is as we talk about leave, I don't want to make light of the value and light of the expense, but it is something that is not an added expense to our budget. I realize we've got a lot of financial conversations to have about our budget in general, but granting leave is not an added expense for us. It's lost productive work time, but we've budgeted for a base set of hours to be worked and compensated, and this just reallocates whether it's time worked or leave. So, local governments are required to provide newly created paid emergency sick leave and emergency family medical leave, and I'll get into that in greater detail. And the considerations underway in the Senate as far as fixing that credit issue, and paid leave does not represent an added budgeted expense. So now, emergency paid sick leave is kind of the first thing that would come into play for an employee that needed to take advantage of the Act. And it provides that the employer shall provide sick leave for 6 different criteria. One is the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local order for quarantine. The second is they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. The third is they're experiencing symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis. I would tell you, the guidance that we're getting locally is don't overwhelm the medical providers by calling them. If you're symptomatic, monitor your symptoms, but for the purposes of this, it may be necessary to suggest that they seek at least a phone conversation with their medical provider. The fourth item relates to caring for an individual who's subject to an order. The fifth is caring for essentially a child under the age of 18 if their school or place of care has been closed due to COVID-19. And the last item is they're experiencing any other substantially similar conditions as specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Labor. So I think that might be additional guidance that could be forthcoming. I haven't seen anything that says anything is imminent. And then I would also note that there is an exception. Employers of healthcare providers or emergency responders may elect to exclude those employees, and that's a decision point that I've tried to flag for your attention. So, with respect to emergency paid leave, A full-time employee is entitled to 80 hours. A part-time employee is entitled to their average hours worked over a 2-week period, and if that's not easily calculated over a 6-month history leading up to that, then it's what were the expectations when they are hired. The emergency paid sick leave is to be available for immediate use. It's available to be used regardless of how long the employee has been employed. There's other provisions that have some employment thresholds, but emergency paid sick leave is available to an employee regardless. The employer may not require use of other forms of paid leave first. So this is available right off the top. And they may not require an employee to search for or find a replacement in order to be granted the leave. It's unlawful for an employer to discharge, discipline, or discriminate against any employee that takes leave, has filed a claim, instituted a proceeding, kind of standard stuff. That is something that we would do. Paid sick time shall not carry over from 1 year to the next. This next statement I quoted directly because we've yet to figure out what it means. The Act says that paid sick time provided to an employee under this Act shall cease beginning with the employee's next scheduled work shift immediately following the termination of the need for paid sick time under subsection A, and that's what addresses the need for leave by reasons 1 through 6. It's going to be necessary for us to get clarification to be able to administer the Act. It appears to be you take less than 80 hours of leave. When you come back, your leave is gone. That just doesn't seem practical to me. I can't imagine that's the intent, but we'll need to get some clarification. So in the event that the paid sick time is used, it has provisions about maximum cost or maximum reimbursement. So the payment shall not exceed $511 a day or $5,110 in the aggregate, which equates to 10 days. And the employee is subject to, and again, it's those first 3 categories. So if an employee is using leave for reasons 1 through 3, then their sick time payment shall not exceed $511 a day or $5,110 in the aggregate. If they're using leave for the last 3 categories, then it shall not exceed $200 a day or $2,000 in the aggregate. And those are related to caring for others and child care because the school or place of care is closed. And then there's a special rule for care of family members, subject to the specified caps and subject to use of reasons 4, 5, and 6. The employee's required compensation shall be 2/3 of the greater, the rate of pay or minimum wage. So you've got dollar limits, you've got aggregate limits, and you've got this 2/3 factor as well. So if the Emergency Leave Act caps are imposed, the daily limits and the maximum aggregate amounts could create shortfalls for employees depending on their circumstances in terms of which form of leave they're taking as well as their pay rates. Purely for some point of comparison, I've provided the following numbers. If you just look at a typical full-time employee that works 40 hours a week, and we have a lot of other scenarios in our organization, but that's probably the easiest one for everyone to understand. $200 a day is equivalent to $25 an hour, and $25 an hour is equivalent to $52,000 a year. I want to be clear, this does not create $52,000 over a year's time of benefit or leave, but just to give you some sense of where an employee's pay rate would fall relative to $200 a day, it's about $52,000 a year. Now, if you apply the 2/3 standard, $200 a day is 2/3 of $300 a day, and you carry that math out, and that's equivalent to $78,000 a year. So in that scenario, a $78,000 a year employee, if their wage rate was applied and the 2/3 multiplier is applied, they'd kind of sync up with $200 a day. The $511 a day scenario, which is for reasons 1 through 3, essentially equates to $132,870 a year of annual salary. So regardless of wage rate, the 2/3 limitation creates a shortfall for all employees. So if they're in that circumstance, the leave would provide them some relief, obviously, but it would not leave them whole. So what we've discussed is the shortfalls experienced by employees due to the Act could be addressed by allowing the employee to use accrued sick leave. That's another decision point for you. They could use their accrued vacation leave. and they could use a personal day or unpaid leave. Again, we can't require that used first, but we could allow them to use that in addition to or supplementing the emergency paid sick leave. Other ways to address that is the city could provide leave advancement for employees without sufficient leave balances to be repaid as their sick and vacation leave is accrued in the future. That's a decision point for you. We could allow, we could provide that they could take emergency sick leave pay equivalent to their full rate of pay. Now, we don't have the ability to change the federal regulations, but we could, by our own personnel policy, make that type of change. Similarly, we could allow them, we could provide some alternate percentage above 2/3 and up to 100%, or we could create some alternate financial cap. In the event the employee is able to work, we could allow flexible scheduling, and that could be varied daily schedules rather than a 5 8-hour shifts or 4 10s or 3 12s. They could work nights and weekends. They could do unsupervised work. They could work from home in certain circumstances. Now, having said that, a concern that I have is it's one thing to say, we'll let you supplement emergency paid sick leave with additional leave. If the easiest way I know to describe this is if you are telling the federal government, I'm taking emergency paid sick leave for 40 hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, I don't know that we can go ahead and give you a flex schedule, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, to backfill, that 1/3. We run the risk of double counting in that scenario. So if flex scheduling certainly can help in terms of how much leave they might need to claim, but I don't know that there's just too much uncertainty whether it could make an employee whole. And by whole, I mean get them back to their full compensation. So the other thing is, so that's emergency paid sick leave. Emergency family medical leave is an additional category for family medical leave, so it's necessary to give you a baseline understanding of family medical leave. Typically, family medical leave is unpaid leave, and for the reasons stated there: birth of a son or daughter, adoption related to children or foster care, a serious health condition, condition that makes the employee unable to perform their duties, or a qualifying circumstance where a spouse, son, daughter, or parent is on covered active duty. So that's something we administer on a regular basis. Employees can use their leave in the normal way that it's allowed in the personnel manual, and then if they run out of that leave, emergency family medical leave gives them unpaid leave, preserves their status with us and not necessarily their exact position, but at least their employment with us, and we have an obligation to reinstate them to as near a similar position as we can. So, as I've mentioned, it may be supplemented with Salina accrued sick leave, vacation leave, and personal days. The Emergency Family Medical Leave Act creates another qualifying event, and it calls it a qualifying need related to a public health emergency. And that is the employee is unable to work or telework due to a need for caring for a son or daughter under 18 years of age due to the school or place of care having been closed. So, child care need associated with school closure or a daycare closure qualifies for emergency family medical leave. The Emergency Sick Leave Act includes 6 reasons that I've mentioned previously. It dials it down to one of those 6 reasons. And the public health emergency means an emergency with respect to COVID-19 declared by the federal, state, or local government. So in an emergency sick leave scenario, it appears to be separate and distinct from all other forms of family medical leave. So as we calculate maximum amounts of leave, the way they kind of structured it and amended the Family Medical Leave Act, there's 12 weeks on the typical or existing family medical leave side, and there's 10 weeks created as it relates to this emergency family medical leave. It amends the definition of employers from a threshold of 50 or more to fewer than 500. However, and I think I touched on this elsewhere, that threshold is not really of a concern to us because as a government employer, if we have one employee, we're subject to the Family Medical Leave Act. So It also includes a broader definition of an eligible employee. Instead of having to have worked a minimum of 12 months or 1,250 hours, the employee, as long as they're employed for a minimum of 30 days prior to the leave request, they're eligible for the emergency family medical leave. The Secretary of Labor has the authority to issue regulations, and the employer may exclude employees that are emergency responders. So that's another decision point for you. The employer shall provide public health emergency leave after the initial 10 days. So now this is trying to sync up those 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave. Once those have run, then the emergency family medical leave kicks in for a lesser set of eligible criteria. So the emergency paid sick leave is that first 80 hours. The Act also states that the first 10 days could be unpaid. And as I've mentioned before, they could use accrued leave that we make available to them, which would be vacation, sick, and personal leave. The sick leave question for child care is a decision point. So with respect to the leave calculation, in this instance, it says not less than 2/3 of rate of pay. That seems to presume that it could be more, but I can't imagine the federal government's going to credit back anything other than the 2/3, but I could be wrong. So the 2/3 rate times the number of hours the employee would otherwise be normally scheduled to work, and that shall not exceed 200 hours a day or $10,000 in the aggregate, accounting for the 10-week duration of emergency family medical leave. So, and as I've mentioned before, it is child care issues are the qualifier. So the 2/3 rate of pay, again, creates a shortfall for the employees, and the not less than language appears to create some discretion possibly. That's a decision point. And not more than 200 also creates a shortfall, which is a decision point. And the type and amount of shortfall depends on the employee's pay rate. So similar to what we discussed previously, on that 40-hour work week full-time employee scenario, $200 a day equates to $52,000, and $200 a day is 2/3 of $300 a day, and that equates to $78,000 a year. So, in the emergency family medical leave side, it's very similar, but shortfalls experienced by the employee could be addressed by the employee using accrued sick leave, if we wish to allow that, vacation leave, personal day, unpaid leave. We could adjust the application of balance. Hang on a second. Leave advancement for employees without sufficient leave. Oh, okay. So one of the things that we could do is put into place leave advancement where they can go into the negative and repay that leave advancement. I would tell you that the personnel policy currently has that provision as it relates to sick leave and grants discretion to the city manager up to 240 hours. So there is some provision for advancement of sick leave, but under different circumstances. So we could change the provision to full rate of pay. That would be at our election and expense, an alternate percentage or an alternate cap. And for those employees that could work a flex schedule, we could work with them in terms of scheduling. So additional accommodation could be provided to employees that wish to preserve the leave balances by allowing a voluntary schedule reduction. I don't know how many employees might want to do that, but if they're motivated and said, I'd like to work and be compensated for less than a full 40-hour schedule, that might be a possibility. Tried to provide you a little bit of a timeline just to explain how this is played out, and I think the thing that's probably most noteworthy is the time lag between enactment and effective date. And so we're in that 15-day period, don't know when, we're kind of working from the assumption that it'll become effective April 2nd. The other thing that is a little bit noteworthy is none of this lines up with any of our pay periods. So from an HR standpoint, processing all this is going to be challenging enough in terms of record keeping, but then you factor in it all falls in mid-pay period. That's a challenge. So I've identified there in kind of the pink or salmon color what we've identified as a gap period for employees from the time that some of these directives went into effect as it relates to self-quarantine and if you travel to Colorado and other locations to the effective date. So in that period, they're subject to our leave policy and what might be available. I also noted our city commission dates and called out the possibility of a special city commission meeting on March 30th. So, as I said, I've been trying to flag decision points along the way, and they arise due to the time lag, due to the elections that are afforded to us as the employer, and the imposition of the caps, both in terms of percentage and dollar amount and aggregate totals. So I've inventoried the decision points for you. I told you that we had, I emailed and said we continued to work on this and had some additional thoughts and recommendations. So hot off the press is resolution number 20-7822. And I'll walk you through that, and then I'm expecting you to understandably have quite a few questions. So accounting for all the recent developments, am I looking at the right one here, Greg? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yep, 20-7822.
Oh, okay.
So we tried to inventory possible measures that we could take. So starting with section 1, I'm proposing that we create a new approach to opportunity for leave advancement up to 110 hours. You may have noticed that Salina County recently did the same thing. They allowed employees to go negative, I think as they described it, 80 hours. The reason for the 110 is you have the 80 that would, in a month scenario, exceeds the 80 that the Act provided for, and that additional amount is 1/3 of 80. So in the event that an employee is in a 2/3 scenario, they could use leave to supplement 2/3 up to 80, and then they could use 80 to get to a full 4 weeks if they're subject to an order like that. I think that also it creates enough that if need be, they can use some of this leave in advance of the effective date of the Act. Then we can observe the Act, and then it would expire, and they could use the remaining leave advancement to finish out the month if it comes to that. And in a leave advancement scenario, well, I guess we get to this here in a second, but the governing body in this resolution acknowledges that the Act provides 80 hours and that emergency paid sick leave imposes a dollar percentage, and that the designation of the 110 hours of leave is intended to anticipate the possibility of the 30-day stay-at-home order or directive. It would authorize the city manager to approve additional leave advancement on a case-by-case basis for unique individual COVID-19 related circumstances. If we have an employee that is subjected to that month-long stay-at-home order, but also got caught up in a travel self-quarantine, we've had a couple of those already, or gets caught up in some symptom-related self-quarantine outside of that period, that give me enough discretion to work with them and grant additional leave advancement. I should tell you that our current policy is they have to use all their accrued leave on the books to begin with. So we do have some employees, just depending on their circumstances, that have used all their leave, or they have a very small balance. We have plenty of employees that have a sizable balance, such that they would have leave remaining after a month and wouldn't be eligible for the leave advancement. The fourth item, the city manager would be authorized to provide that an employee's advanced leave balance shall be automatically reduced by the employee's future accruals of both vacation and sick leave until the employee's advanced leave balance is returned to zero. With respect to sick leave, that repayment, for lack of a better word, comes out of just sick leave. In this instance, I'm proposing that it would come out of vacation and sick leave, so just as soon as employees accrue it, it's being applied to that leave advancement. The city manager would be authorized to provide that an employee may continue to use sick leave as otherwise provided in the personnel manual while they have an advanced leave balance. In that scenario where they truly have got the leave advancement and they have a legitimate reason to be sick, use sick leave, we would need to be able to accommodate them. It provides that the governing body acknowledges that the city manager has authorized the use of sick leave for child care related absences that have recently arisen, basically ratifying that determination that had already happened. It also directs that the use of sick leave is permissible until such time as the emergency family medical leave provisions of the Act become effective. So at the point that the act becomes effective, then it provides for emergency family medical leave for that particular purpose. It provides that the governing body authorizes the use of leave advancement to supplement emergency family medical leave. Provides that the governing body directs the city manager to continue to review the provisions of the act and in an effort to identify additional options for employees to supplement their use of emergency family medical leave that are compliant with the act and future legislation. Doesn't authorize me to implement new determinations, just continue to monitor that and for an opportunity, and I'd have to bring it back to you. It provides the governing body authorizes the city manager to designate essential and non-essential employees and temporarily modify the work schedules, working conditions, job assignments of individual employees, as well as place them on leave or on call as a non-essential employee in response to COVID-19 related needs, recommendations, directives, or mandates. We've got a lot of employees that want to know whether they're understandably want to know whether they're essential or non-essential, and we're going through that process, reviewing each position, and this would allow that designation. It would allow maximum flexibility that maybe you're non-essential, but on an as-needed basis, you're needed and you can work and earn compensation and not have to use leave for that. It also anticipates that as work changes, as we modify our access to the public and service offerings, we may need to take existing employees and say, for the time being, we need you to help with this activity in another division or another department. So trying to just anticipate or at least leave enough flexibility to respond to those type of needs. It provides the governing body authorizes the city manager to waive the less than 5-year service limitation on sick leave advancement for all general provisions currently existing in the personnel manual, so that employees may be eligible to request such advancement for occurrences not covered by emergency family medical leave. Our personnel manual currently, I said it includes sick leave advancement, but it does have the requirement that you have, it imposes a limitation that if you've been employed beyond 5 years, you're not eligible for sick leave advancement. And then it provides the city manager is authorized to assign city staff to assist other public entities or service agencies with COVID-19 relief efforts. Haven't really had those requests yet, but it seems very possible that we could be asked to assist anything from the school to the hospital to social service agencies, and just depending on the need and the effort. So, as I said, this was recently developed as we got more familiar with the act. I wish we could have gotten it to you sooner, but that's why I went through it line by line. I'll stop. I expect there'll be quite a few questions. I'll be happy to, if you want to break it apart, I'd be happy to try to take it, major topic by major topic, or however you'd like to proceed.
Commissioner Day, I went through that about 3 times, and short of having a calculator and everything, it's just like, okay, as long as human resources understands, city manager understands, there's no equitable way, other than the emergency sick leaves, most of our leave would be at full pay as long as the employee is using hours that they have already accrued.
Yes, if they're eligible to use accrued leave that City of Salina leave, it's at their hourly rate, and whatever amount they use, it would be paid in full. So if a 40-hour employee used 40 hours of leave, it would feel like a full paycheck.
And it would be to their advantage to request advancement of sick leave before they use the other leaves that might result in a reduced paycheck?
The expectation here would be that they would use accrued leave first,
Right.
but they would have the leave advancement would provide them some additional income protection if they run out of leave and need to supplement.
At their full pay rate?
Yes.
Right,
Now-
so those are the 2 ways of maintaining that regular paycheck.
Correct.
As long as possible.
The one calculation that we've tried to run, and it's so situation specific, is if you get into kind of that 2/3 calculation or that dollar limit, and you're trying to supplement that with work, actual time worked, I don't know that we've figured out that relationship just yet. But the intention would be you draw down, you figure out what your compensation would be with the emergency paid sick leave, and then you could use accrued leave to supplement that, the shortfall.
And when our employees were on call, are they paid for that?
I'll call on Natalie Fisher, the HR director, to answer that one. It's
Natalie Fisher, Director of Human Resources. We have very few situations that are truly deemed on-call per Fair Labor Standards Act. The situation that I can think of where individuals are paid would be our animal control officers when they are required to carry the phone or to be subject to go respond to specific instances. And that's about it. Now, we have several employees that are subject to call in, but we don't limit their activity while they're knowing that they may have to call in. So currently, they're not really on-call and compensated, but that might be depending on what the future holds and if we are restricted with staffing in different scenarios that we might be forced to take a look at.
How does this, sorry, Mayor Hoppick, how does this calculate with like our fire department who works different shifts?
And that would be something that, Natalie Fisher, Director of Human Resources, we would need to take a look once we were looking potentially at hours limits, because normally the provisions within our personnel manual will increase 40% to offset the 2,080 hours which a full-time employee works on a regular Monday through Friday type schedule, 40-hour week, versus the 24 on, 48 off, which is a 2,912 schedule for shift firefighters. But before we got to that point, we had to first wait for some direction on if we are exempting them or if they play into
So that
any of
once I
this.
saw that, we have some decisions to make on that.
Right.
Yeah.
While I'm here, one thing I did want to point out, we've referred to this as being extremely fluid, and an example, the act required the Department of Labor to provide a poster by today. They did provide it today. It was this evening, and there is guidance that these provisions of the Family First Act will be from April 1 to December 31st. Some of the frequently asked questions about why everyone miscalculated the date. They are counting the date from when the president signed, the night the president signed this into law. They are counting that as day one rather than the next day. So everyone was off a day with their estimations. So that doesn't substantially change a lot, but it will change our drafts and how we go about implementing. That it will be from April 1 through December 31st, 2020.
I mean, will the employee understand this?
Probably not.
I mean, it's fairly intense. I mean, and I'm like, Commissioner Davis, I've looked at it and I was like, well, I'm glad I'm not in HR because it's fairly, it's fairly detailed, and I'm not sure how we get that information out to the employees and everything in a manner
Mike
that's
Scragg,
understandable.
Mike Scragg, City Manager, not to go too far off on a tangent, but what I've been observing is quite a few managers, administrators for cities and other agencies have kind of made blanket pronouncements that you'll get paid. And just that kind of a reassurance without any detail. I did not do that out of recognition that we need to come to you. So that's why we tried to expedite this. It is very complicated. I saw some email I'm on a city manager's listserv, saw some email traffic about that. I had posed a question about how many of you have formally acted, how many of you have administratively acted, what have you done? And I expected that was going to generate, a lively conversation. I got 3 responses. I think everyone is struggling and hanging back and trying to figure this out. So it is complicated, but my goal is to, and I've communicated to city employees by way of recurring emails, here's where we're at, we're working through it, we're going to the governing body, we'll tell you more just as soon as we know more. And so my hope is that we'll be able to at least communicate to them in broad strokes, the act's in place, it gives you some protection. here's what we're doing on top of that. We'll work with you on the details, but we've made provision.
Mayor Hoppick here. Do we have individuals who have already had the issue of childcare closings and that type?
Yeah, Natalie Fisher. We've had some. I'm waiting on additional information this week. We asked our departments to report those numbers to me last week. I want to say the numbers might have been about 15 employees at most were impacted last week, but several of our departments said, but they're telling me they figured something out for the 1 week. Now that it's much longer, there's going to be some additional impacts. So I would expect that number to go up drastically.
Commissioner Hodges, the resolution as it's presented here, does it go ahead and contemplate that we're going to reimburse equivalent to the full-time pay as opposed to the federal guidelines, or is that a decision point that we're going to be discussing and working through this evening?
Well, the granting of leave by us is at full pay.
Right.
So the two-third, the part of this is intended to offset the two-third provision that we can't control, we have to honor, by allowing use of additional leave to, at the full rate, to get the employee to a full paycheck. So I'm trying to come up with easy math as an example, but let's just say that an employee's paycheck is $1,000. So the two-thirds puts them at well, we'll say it's $900. It puts them at $600. They could take the equivalent amount of leave at a full hourly rate to get the additional $300 to get them back to the $900. We can't make them take it first. They're entitled to take the leave that's afforded by the act. The leave, they could say, I'll make that work. I'm not going to use additional leave. I can make that work somehow. Or this gives them the option of using additional leave to backfill that.
Commissioner Davis, the math on that, but the leave that gets them the 600, that's an 8-hour-a-day leave?
Well,
So
yeah.
they'd be using additional leave, so they're using it 10 hours a day?
But the 600 leave is the federal emergency paid sick leave.
But based on
that's-
8 hours?
And that doesn't
8-hour
go
workday.
against
Yeah, that
their...
doesn't count,
go
that doesn't count
their
against
leave.
any of the leave
Yeah.
that we're affording them. That's like a new bank of leave that the federal government's created.
So it's not based on hour?
Our
well,
leave, no.
Even if it is, though, so it would not be basically getting 10 hours of leave for an 8-hour workday? If they say, advance me 2 from Salina, and I'll take,
Right.
but the,
I don't know.
So they're not
I don't know if I'm
double-dipping
making
in-
it better or worse, but let's say they had 100 hours of leave in the bank, and they used 80 hours of the emergency paid sick leave. They'd still have 100 hours of leave in our bank. It's not counting against the leave they have with us. Not counting against the accrued leave, not counting against the leave advancement that we're offering to them.
Or Mayor Hoppick here, Commissioner Davis, were you asking if they could actually, they can't be paid more than what they're being paid now? Were you trying to get to that?
I thought the emergency sick leave was based on an 8-hour-a-day accrual. They haven't accrued it, but you couldn't use more than 8 hours worth of it for any one day. And then if you took 2 hours of your own accrued sick leave, then you're
You're
somehow
totaling 10.
claiming 10 hours a day.
Well,
But if the emergency is not based on hours per day,
yeah, I understand your point, and if you put the two together, the goal is to leave the employee whole in terms of their compensation. With the federal government doing it at a 2/3 rate, it would be more than 8 to get them back to their normal pay rate or paycheck.
Commissioner Hodges here, but I thought that we, as a municipality, weren't going to be, at least as the act is written now, weren't going to be expecting to see any kind of reimbursement from the government. Is that, from the federal government, is that how I understand it?
Yeah, that is correct. But the compensation that we're giving for that leave, at the 2/3 rate, though we're not expending an equivalent of 8 hours because our compensation is capped by the act. So an 8-hour drawdown of emergency paid sick leave is not dollar-wise equivalent to our typical 8 hours of leave that we would give an employee. It's 2/3 of that or capped at the dollar amount that the act provides.
I guess my question is, Commissioner Hodges, I guess my question is if we're paying throughout the mandated leaves as specified in the acts, and we're just going to go ahead and pay the employees, what they would have been compensated anyway, I guess my question is, I mean, we're in compliance with the leave provisions in the act, and I guess I'm just having a really hard time, and maybe this is something that can't be explained to me, but I have a hard time with, if we are not getting reimbursed for the 2/3 pay, why can't we just go ahead and take that extra step and say, you're getting paid for the whole 9 yards, we're not going to mess around with any, additional, parsing leave from here to try to make you whole? I mean, can we just make it a little bit more straightforward than that?
There's just so many instances where the employee needs to elect what they want to happen. And so trying to fit it into our current kind of system of benefits and compensation, we felt like we needed to deal with it as a leave type.
Make it this complicated?
Well, yeah, no, I understand.
I'm just trying to simple it down here.
Well,
Yeah.
if you're in the leave advancement scenario and we're trying to do right by the employee and say we're going to deal with it as a dollar amount, but then we're trying to pay it back or recoup that leave advancement, we're going to be doing it on a leave basis because they accrue leave in the future. We kind of have to keep it apples and apples.
Natalie Fisher, one thing I guess I will add to that, we are forced to make a lot of assumptions right now. The Department of Labor has until April 1st to give us guidelines on a lot of these areas. Adhering to the 2/3 versus 100% on the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, as well as the Emergency Family Medical Leave, is an anticipation of record keeping and thinking we may have to have a way to prove we're in compliance with all of their rules at some point. We absolutely can consider paying above those thresholds, but I think not knowing what the record-keeping requirements are going to be, we were just looking for a way to assure that we are doing exactly what the Act says we are required to do, regardless of how much compensation we'll get a credit for.
Mike Scragg, City Manager, that is a really good point. In the event that we're entitled to a credit, we're going to have to be able to report all this in detail to the federal government, and we're going to have to do it their way, essentially, in terms of...
But I thought we weren't going to get a credit.
Well, as it currently provides, we aren't, but there's an effort to amend the legislation to fix that. So I hold out a little hope that we might.
Commissioner Hodges, but I mean, these are monies that these are funds that we've already budgeted. These are expenses that we already assumed that we would have. I mean, in terms of our employees. So, yeah, I guess my sense is, obviously you want, I mean, my feeling is I'm not so much interested in recouping $200 a day. It would be a nice windfall, but we were gonna pay these folks anyway. So, I would prefer to take that, whatever first steps we need to do, whether it's this resolution or whatever, to reassure employees that they're going to be made whole, in a way that's consistent and easy to understand. And maybe if I sat through an hour-long presentation by Ms. Fisher, she could kind of start to get it, get me to understand it. But I guess I'm just not as much interested in, conformance with the act, but conformance with the act and looking toward a reimbursement is, I think that's a side issue, and that's secondary to, keeping our employees whole.
Commissioner Davis, somewhat related, two questions. The 500, is it companies under 500 now are captured by this?
Yes. Private
Or
companies.
right, so is there any private size, or any size of a private employee that's not covered by this?
In excess of 500.
So in excess of 500, they're not covered,
Correct.
or they don't? Okay, so this puts the burden of keeping a sick employee receiving a check on the business owner in exchange for the tax credit.
Correct.
In that we don't pay a income tax to the federal government, we don't have any money to really recoup.
Correct, but it creates a whole nother aspect, and that is it creates additional banks of leave that we do not have in the system, and we do not have credited to individual employees. It creates 80 hours of new leave that, regardless of whether we're going to get a credit back or not, we're obligated to provide the employee. And so, at a minimum, we have to participate in their leave allocation
But what credit
requirement.
do we get back? I mean, as a municipality,
Greg Bankston, legal counsel, it is a credit against the payroll tax, which the city does pay,
so that, okay.
not income tax.
Okay.
Thank
Natalie.
you.
Commissioner Franz, I must say that I am astoundingly confused by all of this. It's clear to me now that this is a leave balance in excess to what the employee may already hold or may already be accruing. So if I were an employee and I had 40 hours of leave accrued and I needed 80 hours off, I could take 40 at my regular rate of pay, just regular sick leave, and then I could elect to take the additional 40 at the reduced rate of $25 an hour for the second 40. Now, since we've mixed advancement in with this, does that mean that I could take the balance of that second 40 hours and request that as advanced sick leave, payback later?
Natalie Fisher.
I have
Yeah.
trouble factoring in how the advancement plays in to the requirements of the act, and if they choose to advance leave at full pay, can they do that and still not touch this emergency leave, or is this emergency leave going to be applied as a credit against the amount that we are extending as advanced leave?
Okay, Natalie Fisher, in the scenario that you described, my understanding is you would only be using the accrued leave that you own currently if you opted to. There's two different things going on there. You have 80 hours, or the first 10 days, available
of
to you
emergency leave.
for those 6 different criteria.
Okay, But I don't
Yes.
want to do that because I want full pay for that 40 hours. So I would elect to use that first and then take the emergency leave. The question is, if I elect to take the emergency leave and I have no more accrued in my regular leave, can I advance enough regular leave to make myself whole during my use of the emergency leave?
That's the intention.
That is the
Right.
intention?
Yes.
Okay.
Mike Scragg, I think to put a finer point on it, I think the scenario we're trying to address is you have no leave, city leave on the books. Or you don't have sufficient leave to do what you described. And so the only thing that you have available to you is the federal emergency paid sick
Right,
leave,
right.
which isn't going to pay you at full rate. And so we're trying to create, a backstop against that shortfall for our employees.
But in that scenario, the advance leave serves as a supplement to the federal leave sufficient to bring the employee to full pay for whatever
Correct.
period of time that might be.
Correct.
I just want to make sure I understand that that is the relationship.
Correct. And so the 110 assumes they have no other leave, and it's trying, and assumes they're, in a stay-at-home order for a full 30 days. So
Okay.
they're short a third of the 80, and then they're short an additional 80 because the act stopped at 80. And so you put those two together, and that's 110.
Okay, and I think I understand the logic behind the 110. My other question is, and maybe I'm just being completely fixated on numbers, but why is $200 a day, $25 an hour, but $200 a day, if it's 2/3 of 300, is $37.50 an hour?
Is my math wrong? Well,
I-
$300 a day is the 37
Yeah,
number.
but they're limited to 2/3, so why,
All I was trying to do is give you a sense of what pay rate an employee, what annual salary an employee would be making to have the 2/3 kick in. So if they're making, and I'm not on that slide, but if they're making that amount that equates to $300 a day, and then you say you're limited to 2/3 of that, that aligns with the $200 a day maximum payment. So if they're paid $200 a day, that's equivalent to $25 an hour, that's equivalent to $52,000 a year.
I've got that.
If they are making $78,000 a year, that's equivalent to $300 a day, and if the 2/3 limit kicks
They can still only
in.
get $200.
Right, if the 2/3 limit kicks in on the 300.
I could not, I thought that, somebody had funny math going on there.
Well,
Commissioner Hodges,
Not
that was like the
intentionally.
only slide I understood.
That slide is difficult.
We struggled with it, but I was just trying to identify that wage rate where 2/3 would
Right,
equate
okay.
to your daily pay. It would impact your daily pay rate.
Commissioner
And then
Davis.
this
I'm sorry, go ahead.
expands the purposes for which this can be used to include childcare under certain circumstances.
Correct.
The Emergency Family Medical Leave Act extends basic family medical leave in the same way. It extends the circumstances under which it can be used, but to the extent that that is normally, if an employee has leave, the emergency family medical leave is normally done beyond the payment threshold. Is this emergency family medical leave then paid also?
Yeah, Mike Scragg, if I could respond to a few of those things. The emergency paid sick leave has 6 criteria. The emergency family medical leave has 1 criteria that's related to childcare.
Right.
The emergency family medical leave is paid when all other family medical leave is not paid.
Okay, so that is not just an extension of purpose, it is actually an extension of paid leave.
Correct. It's a new category of paid leave. And I assure you, we were not trying to complicate this. We were trying, number one, we were trying to understand it. Number two, we were trying to pick up with their model and supplement it. As much as I would like to, just have some, depending on how generically you want to grant discretion to the city manager, I guess you could give some simple directive to make employees whole, but we were trying to, dovetail this legislation and our personnel manual, and I would caution you that I think we need to be at this level of detail because of all the possible scenarios that are going to come up and the means by which we have to account for it on the front end and recoup it on the back end. It's admittedly complicated, it may not be ideal, but it's building on our current model and the federal act. Now,
Mayor-
one point that's been raised, and I see Greg making some notes over there, we may need to acknowledge that we need to convert the 110 to the equivalent for other work schedules.
Mayor Hoppinger, do we have the ability to account for this? I mean, obviously, this is unusual when you look at accounting systems for payroll and stuff, how,
Yeah. Natalie Fisher, we're working on some other technologies to not only gather the leave requests, but then to have checks and balances against payroll. But it's going to be labor intensive.
yeah, I was just trying to think through the process of how payroll was going to be done with that many employees in different scenarios, so, okay.
Yeah, and Mike Scragg, in the conversations we've had, it doesn't seem like our software will accommodate all those scenarios. There's going to be a manual aspect to it.
Yeah,
Commissioner Hodges, have we had some discussions about our ability to do flexible scheduling or work from home? I mean, can we have, because I think that the more we can offer in that respect, you know, the less we'll probably have to take advantage of some of these things, and people, you know, ending up owing a lot more time than they've accrued or something like that.
Mike Scragg, we have had those conversations. The concern that I have is the essential and non-essential designation and the possibility of a stay-at-home order. At the point that we have non-essential employees under a stay-at-home order, the scheduling is not an option anymore because they're supposed to be at home.
Right,
and
right. But if they
so-
could work from home, even though they were non-essential, they could still continue to work from home.
Well, that gets into the scheduling discretion and some of that, but from an equity standpoint, I think we're going to have to identify essential services, essential employees, and we're going to have to reassess our scope of work. If we already have, with the best of intentions, employees and department heads trying to just creatively come up with work in order to not be impacted. I think, you know, to be equitable to our employees and be equitable to the community, we have to stay somewhat focused on, is it essential, is it a core service that we're going to continue versus, just trying to find any work to be done.
Yeah, Natalie Fisher, one of the assignments for our department heads in conjunction with their supervisors this week has been not only going back to identify and categorize essential and non-essential, because we had done that prior, but to take it further, to think if it's more of a long-term approach, what could be offered to the individuals that may not have the technology provided to them at home, that might be deemed non-essential, but maybe they can have a reduced part-time schedule, or maybe they would be able to have work assigned on more of an as-needed, because depending on the situation, it could be very difficult to create a full-time schedule for someone who's not engaged in interactions with citizens or other departments. But we are inventorying and identifying that to make sure we're addressing it, and we'll be able to communicate with the
This is
employees soon.
Commissioner David, and we're talking specifically not about people who are out sick, but just those employees who are in the emergency FMLA, who have kids at home they have to take care. So these are people who, if their kids were in school, would be working
Yeah.
regular full schedule.
Mike Scragg, what I was referring to is people that are on emergency paid sick leave because of a stay-at-home order.
Can you work if you, I mean, because technically with the COVID, if you're sick enough, you're on if you've been quarantined, then obviously you wouldn't be coming into work. You couldn't
Right.
come into work.
But we have 6 different scenarios. The very first one, Saline County is yet to do it, but in the event that there's just a blanket order, regardless of your health condition, to stay home, then all of our non-essential employees are expected to stay home. So at that point, they're healthy, but they're not at work, and they have the ability to draw 80 hours of leave, but beyond that, they would need some other leave. If they have vacation, they could take it, but not all the employees at this point in time have.
So the reduced hours would be because the city would not be able to come up with 8 hours of work for them to do at home?
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
some job functions are office-based, and I hate to use examples because we haven't, I don't want to create, but
Right.
some of jobs are labor, they run equipment, they're out in the field, they can't replicate that at home.
Right. Yeah, and in that situation, what's the threshold for reduced hours that keeps their benefits covered intact?
Well, in a leave scenario, they
I know
wouldn't be considered
it's 32.
having reduced hours.
Because they
With
then
the-
set up another devastating scenario if they don't get their health insurance premiums paid, yeah.
Natalie Fisher, there's a couple different things going on there. The city has been pretty liberal in the past if individuals are in an unpaid leave type situation and letting them repay and not having a threshold where we automatically in their benefits as of a certain date, regardless of family medical leave or not, with circumstances and with the approval of the city manager. By definition, our personnel manual says full-time is an average of 40 hours a week on a regular basis, and then part-time has and I'm referring to classified part-time, greater than 20 but less than 28 on a regular basis. I don't know that we've contemplated specific hour thresholds in a time of emergency at this point.
And Mike Scragg, if you're applying leave, that counts towards those hour thresholds.
Okay.
It's not actual physical work performed, it's,
Okay. You know,
so,
for a lot of companies, it's 32 hours a week, and
And so, Commissioner Hodges, and so the leave covers essential and non-essential personnel as well?
Correct.
Okay. That distinction doesn't play into it. Thank you.
I guess, Mike Scragg, I guess another point to be made is the equity of treating it as leave to be repaid is the essential employee that's working and is being compensated for work performed. It would seem inequitable to them to have a non-essential employee just receive a stipend for work not performed. So this approach, in the event that they don't have enough leave on the books, lets them advance that leave and then accrue it and repay it. So it's kind of an income insurance for them in a tough situation. But that essential employee that worked, what they accrue in the future is leave they can take at their pleasure, where the non-essential employee that was advanced leave kind of got a vacation forced on them. They may not have liked it, but it will at least allow them to keep a paycheck. If we just take a blanket approach of everybody's going to get their paycheck, we're going to have lots of equity issues about I had to work for my paycheck and they didn't have to work for their paycheck.
Mayor Hoppick here. We talked about approving this resolution this evening, but did I hear where there may be changes that this resolution would not be correct?
Well, I think what Mike Scragg, I think what Ms. Fisher was referring to is the effective date, but if we have a leave bank that exceeds the 80 hours, they can use it before the effective date, then we'll apply the emergency paid sick leave provisions until 80 hours is used up, and then they could apply the leave advancement after the expiration of those hours. So with a number that exceeds the 80 of the emergency paid sick leave, we can span it on either side.
Mr. Davis, I think this just goes to show, you know, from the outside looking in, people say, well, when are you going to announce this? When are you going to do something? people really have no idea of the potential complexity of the scenarios that say, you might face, I literally mean you two might face, as far as, keeping our force paid to the extent that you can, but also getting employees into work while balancing a potential stay-at-home order. It's because folks will still expect the phone to be answered even if there's a stay-at-home order.
Mike Scragg, you're absolutely correct, and part of our planning is trying to take all that into account. But as much as I would have liked when that first employee asked the very legitimate question of what's going to happen to me, I would have loved to have been able to say, I guarantee there'll be no disruption. But there's too much uncertainty in terms of the legislation, the orders that were coming down, and I don't have that authority. As much as I've felt the pressure for the last week or more, just make the decision, I don't have that authority until we as a governing body have the conversation and you give me some direction. So it's complicated, but what we've drafted for you is our best effort to create a workable, although complicated, scenario to equitably provide a backstop for our employees that may not have enough leave accrued to span a 30-day stay-at-home order. And I think it might be productive, and I'd be happy to do it, to go through these section by section and make sure that you understand them, and if you have any questions, try to answer them.
I'll leave that up to the rest of the commission. How do you feel about that? Or
Commissioner Franz, I'm fairly comfortable with the resolution. It addresses all, most of the issues I've seen raised. So I think I'm okay. Did you talk about section 13 in the resolution, which says we can use city staff and equipment to assist other relief efforts?
Yeah, Mike Scragg, I touched on it, but
Okay.
That's a really good point, and that was kind of a last-minute recognition that request may come up in between a city commission meeting, and that, I haven't had any of those requests yet, but there's a number of agencies out there that if they call and say, do you have a piece of equipment, can you, along the lines of, do we have work for employees? If there's a community need, whether it's food, aid, that type of thing, and we have some staff people to put towards that effort, I'd like to be able to have the authority to do that.
Commissioner Franz, again, my comment would be is I would think that in the current circumstances, any assistance like that would be considered to be in compliance with the public purpose doctrine, and so I don't see, I'm not even sure it's necessary, but I'm glad it's there because it does give us a chance to verify that that's fine with us if that's what we choose.
Mike Stragan, you may be right. The other part of that is being able to demonstrate the employee. I know that's not in your job description. You've never done that before, but in these circumstances, you're being directed to do this.
Commissioner Hodges, I think the only other thing I'd like to say is I would just really like to encourage us to be as generous as possible when dealing with both our policies and our compensation with our employees, because they're going to be going through a lot of turmoil at home, on the job. I mean, we're talking about making significant cuts to the budget, and we already know that we need to get a wage survey, and that could potentially have, $1 million plus price tag associated with it. So my feeling is, I would just ask you that as both of you are dealing with these situations, because I think a lot of them are going to be a case-by-case type of a deal and in very individual circumstances, to be as generous as possible, because I really feel like we owe that to our employees.
Commissioner Davis, I understand your sentiment, but I think the more scary scenario for me is not the money that we might advance up now, but how we get the job done if all of a sudden 400 of your 550 employees are sick. That to me is the scarier scenario.
Mike Sprague, I agree with the sentiment, and I understand the concern. The things that we've been doing separate and distinct from this is we've identified what I called Tier 1 service levels and Tier 2 service levels. So fire, police, utilities, computer technology, and I called payroll a Tier 1 priority. Just the ability to get our employees paid in a tough circumstance. So, and we have emergency preparedness in place for fire and police. That's more in keeping with what they do. I'm not going to say that, we aren't going to get caught up in personal protective equipment shortages, and they're not superhuman either. They're out in the community being exposed to, possible contagion. So we're trying to do shift scheduling, split scheduling, and do what we can to mitigate that. Have had conversations with the utilities department about their current operators and their cross-trained operators, and getting the cross-trained operators brushed up in terms of shadowing so that they're have seen it recently and can step in. Recognizing Martha Tasker and how essential she is, have reached out to 3 different private engineering firms and put all of them on retainer so that if need be, 2 of them are local. I can use them as a resource, or HDR is the other one. They're not local, but we work with them extensively and they know our system very well. So we're trying to put that in place, but it's boots and it's belt and suspenders. It's trying to backstop where we can, but to your point, if it's widespread contagion, we can't organize it. We can't legislate that away. We're just going to have to adapt.
Okay, I'll bring it back up here to the commission. Do we have
If I may ask, Greg, I see you making notes over there. Is there anything that we should be amending or updating? The one thing we acknowledged was 110 hours or the equivalent based on work schedule. How you have suggested wording, Natalie?
Yes, and based on the assumption there's no exceptions.
Oh, well, yeah. Natalie's point is that we're not recommending that you take the exemption for public safety or emergency responders. That, to me, that'd be harmful to the emergency responders that they're not eligible for this, whether they go home sick or, again, hopefully they're working as emergency responders. But if they get caught up in a child care issue or caring for a family member, or they get it themselves, they certainly deserve it as much as any other employee.
Fully agree.
Okay, Mr. Bingston, did you have any comments, or you just?
Greg Bingston. Well, the point could certainly be even parenthetically inserted if we want to address that, or the equivalent, based upon what would be the best reference to that scheduling.
Ms. Fisher? Sorry.
Natalie Fisher, we could refer to, in comparison to regular schedule.
I think we're trying to come up with a characterization for everything that's not regular.
Yeah, that's what I was.
But for those individuals, it would still be their regular schedule, or the equivalent of their average. I don't have the personnel manual with me, but we do refer to it when we're looking at the amount of accruals and how those are adjusted based on those work hours. Just as within the Act, also the Families First Act, it refers to provisions for part-time, so we wouldn't necessarily be expecting to accrue or to advance, the 110 hours for someone who is a part-time employee.
Is that spelled out clearly in here? I guess, is that the question?
The best I can come up with on the fly is or equivalent for alternate work schedules.
Are you looking at, where are you looking at on the resolution?
My
What
thought was there, am I correct, Mr. Scragg, that we would be in the first line of section 1 where the authorization to grant up to 110 hours, and then I wondered there
Yeah,
in parentheses possibly, or the equivalent,
accounting for alternate
accounting for alternate
work schedules.
work schedules.
Commissioner Franz, are we talking about the, basically the Fair Labor Standards requirement that we pay certain kinds of shift labor differently? I'm talking about 24-hour schedules essentially
Right.
versus,
Yes.
okay.
are you, Mike Hoppick, Mayor, are you working on some language there to add? Or how?
This is Mike Scragg. I'm in the personnel manual, and our personnel manual currently says all regular employees, parentheses, except employees working 24 hours on duty and 48 hours off duty, earn as follows. So, Ms. Fisher, if you think that's accurate, it looks like that
Would
our
that be
personnel.
the only variance we'd have? I mean, if we're looking as the 24 on 48 hour off
And the part-time
and part-time,
So-
yeah,
would be
so
reduced.
Would it be more accurate to say, or the equivalent for employees who work other than a 40-hour per week schedule?
Natalie Fisher, the only confusion that could be there is if someone regularly works overtime, if there's some expectation that they would get over that, and if we're defaulting back to.
That actually would be my intent. If they are regularly working overtime such that they're used to a paycheck of, something over 40, then I'd like them to have the opportunity to get back to that number.
Natalie Fisher, reading from the newly released poster for employee rights, the wording here is just for the part-time situation for the paid leave entitlements. A part-time employee is eligible for leave for the number of hours that the employee is normally scheduled to work over that period. If that helps with language.
Recognizing it's going to take some application of specifics and discretion, I think my suggestion would be that, or the equivalent for employees who work other than a 40-hour per week schedule.
who work other than 40-hour weeks.
For what it's worth, I didn't work too hard to find other examples of these, but I don't know that there's many communities that have built this wheel just yet. We're kind of on the cutting edge.
Is everyone okay with us approving that with the amendment to the resolution as was stated? Would you read that one more time?
Sure. City manager is authorized to grant up to 110 hours of leave advancement or the equivalent for employees that work other than a 40-hour-a-week schedule, intended to supplement emergency paid.
Do we have a motion to accept the resolution with the amendment?
Commissioner Hodges, I move that we approve resolution number 20-7822 with the following amendment under section 1. The city manager is authorized to grant up to 110 hours or the equivalent for employees working other than a 40-hour-a-week schedule.
Commissioner Davis, second.
Okay, Mayor Hoppick here, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments?
I'm sorry, just a quick housekeeping item. I see in sections 9, 10, 11, and 12 that I slipped into referring to the governing body authorizes, when in fact the format otherwise has been that the city manager is authorized. If I may make those non-substantive modifications, if the resolution passes, I would appreciate that opportunity.
Looks like the commission is okay with that. So we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7822 with the aforementioned amendments. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? I'd like to thank Mr. Scragg and Mrs. Fisher. I know they were down here, was it was Greg here too? Sorry, I didn't mean to leave.
That's all right.
Was it Saturday or Sunday? Most of the day.
I honestly can't remember. I think it was
I
Saturday.
can't remember they run
It was
together, but I
Saturday.
know there was a lot of time spent on this, and we appreciate that because obviously this wasn't easy. We were all a little taken back by the depth of it. So thank you, all three of you. So
It's
Okay.
important to our employees, and we recognize that.
what's that?
It's important to our
Yes,
employees,
yes,
and we
it is.
recognize that.
Okay, that leads us to 7.5.
Shandywick City Clerk, item 7.5, follow-up discussion and explanation for the change in the downtown streetscape project related to the license agreement for sidewalk dining with Lighthouse Properties 3 Incorporated at Starbucks on the corner of Mulberry and Santa Fe, approved by the City Commission on March 9th, 2020.
Let's see, Jim, is Jim here?
Waiting in the wings.
Okay.
He'll take Miss Fisher's place, and
Okay. One in, one out.
yeah.
It's like,
Mayor, if I may, related to that last item, I suppose it goes possibly without saying, but we will certainly modify that whereas provision to refer to the, now that we know that effective date of April 1 instead of April 2nd, that would also be reflected.
okay. You're up, Jim.
All right. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully, this is not nearly as complicated as your last couple of items, but we do take it very seriously. And what we're referring to is the action that was taken 2 weeks ago on March 9th, when the commission approved a license agreement for sidewalk dining for the new hotel for Yaya's and Starbucks. I propose to go through some slides quickly, and I promise to be as brief as possible, recognizing the hour that we're in, but as detailed as you need. So I'm going to go through some slides quickly, kind of explain what we think happened and why. And then if you have any questions after that, I've added just a couple slides to what was in your packets to try to hopefully make it more self-explanatory. But we want to explain about the questions that were raised by Commissioner France on the 9th and the resulting changes to the project that was observed. So this is just the same thing that you saw 2 weeks ago in the license agreements, and I want you to pay particular attention to the planter box and seating arrangement that's in that photo. If Mike could go to the next one. Well, is there two of them there? Did you skip one? Go back one.
That one?
No, you go back one. No?
If I go back anymore, it's the beginning.
All right, well, that's, yeah, there's that one.
Oh, okay.
There's that one, which is the overall schematic. And just to give you an idea of what was going on, it's a beautiful day out there, perfect for construction, but we are trying to finish that corner of the project, which is one of the last areas on the Streetscape project. Smoky Hill was working on the south side of the hotel, pouring curb, getting sidewalk ready. There was a crane out in the street that was helping assemble some stuff on the building. We had 2 scissor lifts that were working for the building contractor trying to install the black awning that you see on the corner. That we had a lot of people working in a small place and a lot going on, trying to meet the opening deadlines that everyone's made in their development agreements and in our contracts. If you go to the next picture, the planter right there on the left behind the guy in blue is the one that we're talking about. That is the schematic that Lighthouse Properties provided early in their application, and they've been working with our planning department on the license agreement, which allows sidewalk dining for Yaya's Restaurant at the north end of the hotel and Starbucks at the south end of the hotel. The next one, please, Mike. This was the submittal for the building permit, and realizing that we had our plans for the streetscape done before the hotel plans were completed. The details of how we tie into it have been kind of vague, and we've had to adjust and work with them since the very beginning. But if you notice, it shows up here, but the seating and the flower bed that's shown on that initial building permit matches the existing, what we had there before. Remembering that for about the last year, nothing's been on that corner at all. It's been ripped off. People have been working on the hotel. What was there before is kind of a vague memory now, but that is kind of what was there before. If you'd go to the next one, Mike. These are submittals that Lighthouse Properties submitted as part of their sidewalk dining, and they focus on the plans for the hotel, the two restaurants, the sidewalk area right adjacent to the hotel, but the streetscape details are subjective, or they're not included because they're not really a part of what they were asking for. So this was what was submitted to Dean Andrew in the planning department. Next slide. This is another photograph or a zoomed-in area that actually shows the sidewalk seating, the extent of the awning, the license agreement that was applied for. This is what was submitted to our planning department. The next slide. This is one of the original plan sheets that was submitted to the hotel's architect that show what's going on that corner. And the problem with black and white is that there's different shades of gray. Some indicate kind of the shadowy shades are supposed to be the existing. The darker lines are supposed to be what's proposed or new. And that's hard to see, so let me blow it up a little bit. The next slide, please. You blow it up a little bit, and I would say that without some insider knowledge, you still can't tell what all of those lines mean. I've looked at it. I could probably give you the dimensions of each one of them in my sleep, but Dan and I are very familiar with what all of these symbols mean. The planning people weren't necessarily, because they've never been involved in the actual street construction. Now, we do look at license agreements, and we had been working with the hotel. As a matter of fact, we worked with them on the location of the planter beds adjacent to Yaya's and approved final plans for that last August. And we had those changes, and they were recorded. And at that time, we were told that Starbucks may be interested in sidewalk dining too, and they would let us know. We never heard any more. We've been busy building the project. Here it is, springtime, everybody's getting excited. Our contractor's ready to jump in as soon as the hotel people are out of the way. And they submit an application to our planning folks, and between our planning department and our engineering department and the architect, we didn't get it right as far as which planner was on the plans and what was approved. It's just a very, very busy area. If you take a look at another plan sheet, the next sheet, this is one that's not blown up. Even though it's not blown up, it's very clear which ones, the white L-shaped ones, are the new planter beds. It's very clear on this plan sheet. Those weren't the ones necessarily the architect was provided or used. If you go to the next, these are the two I added. That outlined area there is the old planter bed on the corner sheet that I showed you that was provided to the architect at the beginning. The next slide, that is the new planter bed that was originally proposed as part of the Streetscape project. Recognizing that none of that was on the ground when the application was made, our planning department, Dean and John, went out and measured from the curb and made sure the dimensions from the curb to the building all fit, the stuff that the hotel had provided matched, and that there was adequate access for pedestrians past the proposed license agreement and dining area. Well, as luck would have it, the contractor was out of the way, the weather got nice, our contractor had a bunch of people available, and they swooped in and stuff changed overnight. That literally the same week as the week before the license agreement was being proposed, that planter was built. So when Commissioner France asked the question, are you sure there's clearance there? He was absolutely right, there wasn't. Because the original planter that was proposed in the plans was built and was not adjusted for the sidewalk dining. If all of us had felt like that was being proposed or necessary, we would have made those adjustments on the fly. At the same time, our contractor, Smoky Hill, had 3 crews available. The hotel contractor was going to be out of the way for a while, and they wanted to get as much of the project done as possible this spring to try to coincide with the opening of the hotel, which is a major star bond generator. So they had this done. They were ready to pour the pieces around it the next day, and it was under threat of those people not being available the next week or fewer people the following week. We had to decide what to do. And because we had worked with a lot of different businesses this whole time during construction on the location of the planters, the flower pots, the grades to adjust the sidewalks, to make sure we had ADA compliance, and maintaining the flow line in the gutters, but also maintaining a proper cross slope so that we're ADA compliant. But then floating up and down to meet the doorways of 100-year-old buildings was kind of a trick. So we've had to make a lot of just little tweaks and changes this whole time. So we were accustomed to that. If we'd known about it, we would have done it initially. In this case, it was built. Dan was out of town. He's the project manager. He probably would have recognized in the photo at the meeting that it wasn't what he thought has been proposed or what had been approved. I was aware that we had made some changes last August, and I thought it included all of them. So I sat here, agreed with Dean that, yeah, there's plenty of clearance there, but Dean Andrew is the one that went out the very next morning and made sure and double-checked it and found out that we were wrong. And we misinformed you, and we wanted to make sure and bring it to your attention because it's important that you have our trust and confidence that we're giving you accurate information. We want to be transparent in what we're doing. Now, this recognizing that this was a kind of a hot topic, Mike Scragg said, don't do anything until we know what happened because of the emails that all of you received and who's going to pay for it. Unfortunately, Mike was called out of town. Our contractor was launching to get going and getting his corner done, especially the west side of the building, because we've been told that if the west side was done, the restaurants could open ahead of the hotel. So getting that west side was particularly critical in our critical path schedule. So I and Dan made the decision, go ahead and cut 3 feet off of that flower bed. We will accommodate the sidewalk dining. We have subsequently got a price of $1,000. The $1,000 is I think acceptable for the equipment and the man it took to cut it off and reform it and re-pour it for such a small quantity. And go ahead and go to the next one, Mike. Just as an example, we had tried to place a flower bed next to Yaya's in the plans, but we necessarily didn't like it because it was too close to the entrance and it was too close to the big flower bed, but it was shown there because we really didn't know what was going on with the hotel because their plans weren't necessarily complete. But if you look right across the street, you notice that the one across the street is further to the north. So as we coordinated with the hotel, we actually took that planter out of the plans because it really didn't fit the spacing and the rest of the project. So we were able to remove that flower bed or planter box or whatever you want to call it from the project, accommodate Yaya's and the sidewalk dining, which the sidewalk dining and stuff on the street has been important to everyone ever since the very beginning of the concept study, the battle between consultants on who got to design it, through all of the public involvement that we did through the accelerated design process, and all of the effort that we went through in 2 years of construction to try to make the merchants happy so that they had a streetscape where people could enjoy the outside. So we have done it there. The next slide shows, because it wasn't done, we've had to design and fit and come up with the pullout and the entrance for the south side of the hotel as we were completing the project as well. And if anybody knows, that corner has been a habitual problem for us as far as anytime there's a heavy rain, it's 6 inches of water. The pipes will drain it, but it takes a while. And having that submerged area next to the new hotel or even anywhere was not acceptable. So we've got a storm sewer improvement project that is also planned for later this summer. It was delayed because it took us 9 months to work with the railroad to put the pipe under their tracks. But we've coordinated and worked with the hotel on the planner locations and the pull-out area pretty extensively on the south side. We've had to adjust the slot drain, and there again, we came up creative to come up with a handicap ramp in a pull-out area that met all of the criteria to be ADA accessible. Next slide. We've done similar type stuff with all of these other restaurants and attractions downtown. We've had to tweak things as far as floating the sidewalk up, adjusting the pots, flower pots that are irrigated, the planter boxes that have irrigation as well as low voltage lighting elements. So we've had to tweak everything, and in addition to these, we had to float the sidewalk up at United Capital, and because of the closeness of their doorway to the alley, we actually had to retrofit a handrail at Heritage Realty there on Iron, East Iron, just right there by the alley, to make sure that it was safe and we had ADA access. So we've had a lot of things that we've adjusted to try to complete the project, all of it trying to stay within the budget, which we had an extremely low contingency, and on time. And on time has always been measured by getting it done before the Starbond generators were ready to open. We had very critical dates. We're beyond those dates because the hotel, our contractor could not finish the project because of the conflict with the hotel and the Mulberry, corner of Mulberry and Santa Fe being where the two circles combine. So Dean Andrew brought the license agreements before you on the 9th. He thought with all his heart he had done his due diligence, and Dean is very professional and probably the most thorough person I've ever worked with. And he was very upset that you know, he had made a mistake, or there was a mistake, that he had told you guys incorrect information. And it was just a matter of us, our engineers, our planners, and the architect communicating on that final element of the design is what had happened. So we knew we had a problem. Mike said, don't do anything until we know what happened and who's going to pay for it. Mike, unfortunately, his dad was ill and he was out of town. He was out of state. He specifically said, don't do anything, and Dan and I did it anyway. So if you're upset, be upset at us that we felt like completing the project and getting it done for a $1,000 item out of an $11 million project. 3 feet of a flower bed was not going to be critical. We'd figure out who pays for it later. Subsequent to that, Lighthouse Properties has contacted Dean and said they're happy to pay the $1,000. They appreciated the way that we've accelerated construction, and we continue to work on that corner with them, both of us together, trying to get it done. So, Guy Walker did say that he would call in. I don't know if he's lasted this long, but he did say he would call in and confirm that they are willing to pay for it if you so wish. So you have some options. You know, we had a limited time to get the project done. We had multiple crews ready for a very short period of time. This whole time we've been focusing on finishing on time and on budget. We are still under budget. Even with a $200,000 contingency on an $11 million job, we're still under budget. We have money to pay this $1,000, or you can have the hotel pay the $1,000, or you can reconsider the sidewalk agreement if you think for some reason that is the appropriate measure to take. We could rip it out and put it back if you so desire. We apologize for giving you misinformation. It wasn't because there's some conspiracy that we were out here to misinform you. It was something, we made an honest mistake. We were in a hurry. I disobeyed my direct supervisor, which I am sure I'm going to pay for. So I feel bad that I didn't do as he had asked, and as a consequence, I'm here to take I guess whatever you guys think is appropriate. So we are making good progress. We are with the weather. We're making great progress. We're hoping to pour the last pieces of the north side of Mulberry this week. We've still got quite a bit of bricks and stuff to repair, but it's going to 2 or 3 weeks. We'll be making real close progress to getting it done. Like I said, that you have 3 options. to take the project, pay for the changes out of the project funds, ask the hotel to pay for the relocation of the planter box, reconsider the sidewalk dining, sidewalk license agreement for the sidewalk dining, or we can do something else if you so desire.
Mayor and
With that, I'll
Commissioners, if I
stand
may.
for questions.
Mike Scragg, Jim kind of touched on some of the points I wanted to make, but going into this project, I've never seen a project this size with this small of a contingency. And I don't want to say I was skeptical, because Jim assured me he could do it, and I believed in him, and he did it. It's amazing to me that he did. So typically, we wouldn't have a department head standing before you over a $1,000 item on what I think is about a $12 million project. If we treat our employees that way, they won't make any judgment decisions. They won't apply discretion, and all decisions will come through my office or your office. There's a few factors why Jim's even here tonight. One, the question came up in open session. I was concerned that it could have impacted your decision about a license agreement. Secondly, I wanted to address some of the points that Jim mentioned in terms of concerns, if not accusations, about untruthfulness and lack of transparency. And then Jim was adamant that he wanted the opportunity to address you, and I respect that. But I go back to, it's a $1,000 decision. It's within Jim's discretion. I implicitly trust his discretion, as demonstrated by this project. The point that he made, if the timing were different, he made these calls all day, every day. That was his job. The hitch for me that necessitated bringing it to you is you asked a very legitimate question, Commissioner Franz, and we gave you the wrong answer, and the best way that we thought we could address that is come back to you. So we're here to own it as staff. I really don't want to have to do this on a regular basis, because staff shouldn't have to go through this. But this one was a little bit unique. It wasn't just a discretionary project management decision. It interrelated to your deliberation a week prior. So if Jim's worried about repercussions, he's not going to have any from me.
Commissioner Davis, I look at the 99.999% of the stuff that's been done without a hitch that we haven't had to worry about. So it's a non-issue for me. I mean, it's been corrected. We know why it happened, and let's move on. I mean, if the hotel just wants to make a donation, we can split it, but I mean, it's
Commissioner Hodges, I think we've been pretty solid partners with the hotel, and I think it's very, very fair of them to offer to pay for it, and I, for one, I would never look a $1,000 gift horse in the mouth after tonight, so thank you. Thank you, Guy. And of course, this doesn't impact my decision, and I think you absolutely made the right call, dealing with it on the fly and making it work within the parameters that we have. My concern, I mean, $1,000 project, or $1,000 in a project of that magnitude, good call on your part. Here's where my concern is, and I don't want to get into anything that we should be in executive session for, but I have noticed a pattern of behavior, not by Mr. Kowak ever, but where commissioner concerns are dismissed out of hand, and I see that as a pattern of behavior, and I don't want to get any further into it than that, but that's where my concern lies, is that I mean, for a lot of us, the questions that we are asking are not like gotcha questions or whatever. We just want to make sure that things are getting done the right way. And I think that maybe the less that we can feel like overprotective of our turf or projects or whatever, and realize that we're all in this together, I think that would be a really awesome kind of change in attitude. I do have a question in regard to whether or not the hotel is going to be able to open by April 1st, because I think that that's when our extension expires, is on April 1st, and I didn't know I realize there's 1,000 other balls in the air at this point, but if we need to, coordinate with them a further extension
Right.
on their opening date.
The
Hopefully they will.
Mike Scragg, the most recent conversation I had with them, that agreement provides a completion date, and then it has a 90-day window.
Extension, right.
And so I don't expect that they will be complete by April 1, but they have indicated they'll be within that 90-day window.
Thank you.
Did any other commissioners have any comments?
Commissioner Franz, I suppose I'd better, since I asked the original question, and I didn't do so in a manner to try to disrupt the project. I just saw something on the picture that I thought looked odd. And I got an answer from the staff and went on down the road, and then I later got a picture that showed half of the flower box being taken out, which of course kind of surprised me at the time. So I wasn't inordinately concerned about the issue, and fixing it for $1,000 is great, and we can go on down the road. But I do want to say that I have noticed from time to time, and I don't want to call it a pattern, but and again, Mr. Kowak, I have not seen you do this, but sometimes staff seems to feel like they are obligated to give us an answer even if they don't know the answer at the time, and they kind of speak off the cuff, and sometimes they get that it's not correct. And I just want to let you know, Mr. Scragg, that it's okay to say I don't know sometimes to us, because we do ask some off-the-wall questions sometimes. And I would rather have staff do that than say something that may not be correct or may be only partially correct, and then have their credibility called into question either by any of us or by members of the public, because they may have misspoke out of good intentions maybe. So I just want to be, this is, and that wasn't my intent to start with. I mean, it just happened to happen this time in that way. And so I was a little bit disconcerted by that when it says, it wasn't wide enough,
No, and Rod, that was the communications part of it. Dean didn't know. Him and John, the other planner that had worked on this, actually went out and measured it and tried to make sure that everything fit.
Yeah.
And I mean, to the inch.
Yeah.
We've got hopefully 3 inches of clearance that we're good. But I want to thank you for noticing it, because by you bringing it up, we were able to, because they were going to pour all around it and do something more the next day, you minimized the additional expense by us catching it that early. And it was through no, malintent, or it wasn't us trying to cover it up. We were trying to get it done, and this decision to remove 3 feet of the planter box, fix it, put sidewalk there, try to get it done by April 1st, and that's the date we've been told, to try to get at least the west side done. I'm glad you said something, because it allowed us the opportunity to fix it so it didn't cost us more.
And I'm good with, knowing all the circumstances with what transpired. I mean, I'm good with that, but I do share some concern. It's a lot of pressure to stand at that podium and be asked a question, and you say, well, I don't really know what that, go ahead and say you don't know. I mean, I'm fine with that. I guess I'm presuming the others would be too.
Yeah, Mayor Hoppick here, I think that he, in his, again, Dean hadn't been as involved in the street as Jim had, and I think really he probably thought it was. I'm glad he went out and measured the next day. I can see from looking at the drawings, that if this is the only, I call it bugaboo, we've had in this size of project, we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess I just asked staff, and I think I follow Commissioner Franz. I just tell people, be honest with us. Don't hide anything from us. We're pretty forgiving and understanding, and again, it was just one of those things that happened. I think it's. I'm just glad we caught it when we did, or we'd probably have to be readdressing the license agreement for the Starbucks, obviously, if they would have gotten everything completed, because it would have been a considerable higher expense if they'd have got everything. And I got to admit, I'd been out there earlier that week because there's a pad for sculpture right outside that, and I'd looked at it and it didn't even dawn on me that there wasn't 6-foot clearance for that. So anyway,
Mike Scragg, I just want to acknowledge, point taken. The expectation is we need to be knowledgeable and give good information, or we need to back up a step and get the correct information. So we'll manage to that, and not to be dismissive of it, but we got a lot of individuals in our organization, and we're going to make mistakes. It's how we rise to them that I think test our character.
Well, this is Jim Kowach. I just want to apologize to you and Mike both for not doing as we were told, but we did have the best interest of the project in mind, and that we do care about the information we bring to you. We want it to be accurate, we want to be honest, and we want to be transparent. So,
Thank you.
do we have any, I guess for public comment, is there anybody?
You can ask for star 9. I don't think we have any true
Anybody still on start?
citizens.
Okay.
We have some staff and the newspaper, it looks like.
Okay, we do have some action on that if you go to page 3, to either approve the addition or to,
This is Commissioner Ryan. Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the use of project funds to pay for the additional $1,000 for the relocation of the planter in conflict with the sidewalk dining request and license agreement granted 3/9/2020.
Commissioner Davis, second.
Franz, second.
we have a motion and a second to approve the use of the project funds for the relocation of the planter. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes. Okay, thank you very much, Jim.
thank you for your work. You guys have had a hard
and
night.
again,
We do appreciate it.
Mayor Hopkins, I do have to admit, I'm like City Manager Scragg. When we had that contingency, I thought we were crazy with that size of project, so pretty
Jim has
impressive.
managed the heck out of that project.
Yeah, they really did, so thank you, Jim. Yep. Okay, that moves us to 7.6.
Shandy Wick City Clerk, item 7.6, resolution number 20-7823, granting additional temporary authority to the city manager related to the COVID-19 response.
Mike Scragg, City Manager. This is a late addition to the agenda, and so I'm going to cover it in detail for you since you haven't had the opportunity to review it in advance. Again, as we're trying to anticipate what might be forthcoming out of the COVID-19 issue, we're looking at the need for expanded city manager authority, or just decisions that are likely to come up that are out of the ordinary and need to be prepared to address. So what I've given you in the memo, there is a template resolution that was circulated by the League of Kansas Municipalities. I'm not replicating the template. I'm just giving it to you as a point of reference. As a quick summary, it proposes that the city manager may make all decisions related to personnel and city operations without the need to obtain governing body approval. Rather than that, we just went through the personnel manual resolution. It grants authority to the city manager to close facilities and suspend operations, which we've had to make some of those decisions, and we may have to make some of those decisions in the future. The template gives authority to temporarily amend, extend, or suspend policies and procedure in response to the emergency, including the purchasing policy and the personnel policy. I'm not proposing either. Other than the amendment that we made to the personnel policy earlier this evening. The template grants authority to approve purchases exceeding previously established purchasing authority. Our purchasing policy does have an emergency purchase provision and kind of spells out what emergency purchases are, and then requires that those be reported to you as the governing body. At the moment, we haven't identified any likelihood of emergency purchases. Personal protective equipment is a thing that occurs to me. If we have a supply, but if that becomes an issue, or if an opportunity presents itself, obviously, can't anticipate all of it, everything, but don't have anything in particular in mind at the moment. The template suggests authority to make other decisions deemed necessary to continue city operations and secure the well-being and safety of city employees and the public at large in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We did pick up that language, really just to be responsive to public health issues, city employee health issues, so that if something should arise, we're not stuck in needing to either wait till the next weekly meeting or call a special meeting. The template suggests the city manager shall keep the governing body informed of the action by reporting at the next meeting of the governing body. I've been trying to do that by email daily, and certainly can do that on the bigger topics at each meeting. And then the template suggests governing body ratification of prior city manager decisions, and we tried to incorporate that into the resolution that we prepared for you. So really just trying to give you a sense of what might be the norm, for lack of a better example, that might be going on in the state compared to what we're proposing as part of this resolution. So resolution number 20-7823, trying to take a measured approach to asking for any additional authority. In section 1, it provides the city manager authority to close city facilities and suspend city operations. As I've mentioned, we've made some of those decisions and I've communicated those to you. I can't say that there won't be others, but none come to mind at the moment. If anything, it might be in response to, infection and outbreak, to where our staffing is so short that we have to pull back a service or close an additional location. It also provides that for making other decisions deemed necessary to continue city operations and that well-being and safety of employees in the public at large language. The second section says that the city manager shall keep the governing body informed of actions taken pursuant to this grant of authority by reporting to the governing body at the next meeting after the action was taken. The third section is a ratification of decisions that have previously been made by me as the city manager. And to date, those are cancellation of affected meetings of the city subordinate boards, committees, and commissions. Those cancellations were based on the mass gathering limitations, as well as the timing of us trying to figure out an alternate meeting format. We tried to concentrate priority on the city commission meeting and canceled the rest. Salina Fieldhouse cancellations, we canceled all rentals, again, because of the mass gathering limitations and the likelihood of exceeding 50, let alone 10. We closed the facilities listed there, Barkley Dog Park and the dog park behind the Salina Animal Services building. We closed the Carver Center, Friendship Center, Lakewood Discovery Center, Salina Fieldhouse, the Smoky Hill Museum, public restrooms in City of Salina Parks, the Salina Drop-Off Recycling Center, and the Household Hazardous Waste facility. And then we suspended, and this was by executive order of the governor, water service disconnections. I would tell you that we were more liberal in terms of application of that, both in terms of suspension of shutoffs that were in process, and then we went back and reviewed customers that had been shut off prior to the governor's executive order and turned them back on. So at this point, as of today, I believe it was, I was advised we don't have any customers shut off to my knowledge. We suspended the Salina Animal Shelter spay and neuter program for the public. We're continuing to spay and neuter the animals that we have in our care, but we've suspended the public program just because of the traffic and interaction. We've suspended various parks and recreation department programming, leagues of different sorts, again, because of the mass gathering limitation. And then we suspended various Salina Arts and Humanities Department programming. That's really the extent of it. I think we've already addressed the sick leave decision that I made as part of the personnel resolution that you acted on earlier. And other than that, I can speak in greater detail in terms of some of the preparations we've been trying to make, and we're closely monitoring the directives that might come out of the health department, with the health officer being the one having authority to make that declaration. We're closely monitoring the declarations of other counties just to get a sense of kind of that whole essential, non-essential guidance and how we might apply it. And we've reallocated computer resources to employees remote computing resources to employees we identified as essential. Quite a few of those employees, we're kind of looking at it from, well, I plan to go to work, and I appreciate their intent to go to work, but in the event that they're quarantined for symptoms or anything else, we might need them to work from home. So that did take some non-essential computing for non-essential employees and reallocate it to essential employees, and we're trying to backfill those computing resources. I think that's within my purview as the city manager and didn't require to be in this resolution. And I think that's about it. I'd be happy to try to answer questions.
Yeah, Mayor Hoppick here. I had one quick question. On the boards and committees, is there any requirement that they have to meet so often, or?
Yeah, we actually have another action item related to boards and committees, which is the next resolution.
Okay.
So,
I guess we just got that, because I hadn't
yep,
viewed it. So, okay.
we added that one as well.
That was
So-
my only question, is if we were out of compliance, if we didn't have some of those meet every so often. So, okay. Any questions for City Manager Scragg? Yes.
Two short ones. And Commissioner Davis, under C, Section 1, letter C, the operations are more from the operational standpoint. That would not address the financial decisions we discussed in item
Right,
7.1.
correct. I envision that just on a day-to-day basis, something arises and we have to kind of alter our approach to keep the landfill going or keep sanitation services going or.
Is there a limit to your emergency purchasing authority?
Don't know off the top of my head. There's a limit to my level of comfort, I will tell you that.
Commissioner Hodges, here just to follow up, that was the question that I had jotted down when you said that there were some guidelines in regard
Right.
to emergency
Commissioner
purchasing
Franz
power.
may know off the top of his head. I think he might have wrote it. but-
I do not recall. It's been a few years.
I would tell you, in my just general approach, and I hope you've seen that out of me by now, it's truly going to need to be an emergency that is imminent. And I recognize your authority and want to bring you as much as I can in terms of those decisions. But if we have, I don't know, if we have a lot of the things I'm thinking of would be the normal course of things. If something breaks down at the water plant, we need to keep operations going. We make the purchase and we make you aware of it. So if it's plausible and practical to defer it and bring it to you, that would be my first course of action.
Commissioner Davis, if it's easier to not designate an amount and trust your judgment, I'll go with that. If a number is needed, I had a number in mind, but if it...
Commissioner Franz, if I might make a comment, despite I said I don't remember, I don't recall there being a limit because an emergency is an emergency, and sometimes you just cannot get a governing body together in an hour. And the city manager's example of the primary pump at the water plant or some other issue that's critical to community health and safety, you have to go ahead and do that.
Well said.
So an amount is probably counterproductive.
I thank you for that.
Just my comment. And if I might ask a couple of questions, the golf course is still open for business, I presume?
Modified operations, but yes.
Okay. And do we know anything about TPAC?
They have reached out to all their bookings and rescheduled them. They have scheduled some things out in the future on the assumption that they'll have an opportunity to have that event. They rescheduled the circus, but in terms of mass gatherings, they've complied with the governor's order.
Okay, thank you.
And, they are an operator of ours, but I didn't include them in here just because it's part of their operational responsibility.
Any other questions?
Commissioner Hodges, just a comment. Thank you very much for your help in ensuring that the food bank client had service reestablished. I really appreciated you taking time out to do that. And I also really appreciate having the daily updates. Like you said, the situations are fluid, and it helps keep us up to date. And when people ask us questions, it helps us disseminate accurate information. So thank you.
Happy to do it. And you're kind of my eyes and ears as well. So if you're hearing things out in the community, I appreciate the feedback. Not to sidetrack the conversation, but I do know I've personally had feedback about why the recycling center was closed, and thought that might come up in the comments. And we've seen that plastic is the surface that it lives on the longest, or the contagion lives on the longest, and the large majority of those products are water bottles, which are in people's mouths and having saliva on them potentially, and other food products. So just out of protection for our own employees, we felt like that was the prudent thing to do. And then we have to transport that product multiple counties away for processing, which is not advisable at the moment either. Or, we're just trying to minimize exposure for our employees, and we're also to the point where we're having to concentrate on some core services. So, as an example, to observe the social distancing, we no longer can have 3 people in a sanitation vehicle when they're moving from route to route. So we're now having to have a shadow vehicle follow behind the regular vehicle to grab that 3rd employee and transport them. So that's something that we can use the SDRC employees to help with.
Okay, I'll bring it back up to the commission. Do I have a motion?
Mayor Hopping, Commissioner Davis here. Move approval of resolution number 20-7823, granting additional temporary authority to the city manager related to COVID-19 response.
Commissioner Hodges, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7823. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Okay, 7.7.
Shandywick City Clerk, item 7.7, resolution number 20-7824, canceling meetings of certain City of Salina, Kansas subordinate boards, committees, and commissions in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency and the governor's executive order number 20-14.
Mike Sprague again. The documentation's getting more sparse. We have a resolution for you. I didn't have a cover memo with it, but resolution number 20-7824 is intended to kind of buy us a little bit of time to be compliant with the governor's order for as it relates to mass gatherings, and frankly, just kind of focus our efforts on the most important actions at the moment, which I think are at the city commission level. The resolution acknowledges Governor Kelly's order and its effective date. It notes the inherent unpredictability of the number of people that will want to participate in a public meeting, and it notes the inherent complexity and limitations involved in conducting public meetings in compliance with the Kansas Open Meetings Act. And so what we're proposing is that all meetings of the city's subordinate boards and committees are canceled for as long as Executive Order number 20-14, its subsequent substantive equivalent, or any federal, state, or local orders similarly limiting mass gatherings remain in effect, and reserving to the city manager the authority to convene any of the boards or commissions if, in the city manager's discretion, a compelling public interest requires that a meeting be convened, and the meeting can be conducted in compliance with the executive order and Kansas Open Meeting Act as well. One of the questions I know that's come up is what about planning commission applications and those timelines, and we are paying attention to those in terms of the status of an application and whether there's a mandatory clock, and so we think we have an approach there as well, and we'll, in very few instances do we feel like we're bound to go forward, and we'll try to work with the applicant first and foremost. But so we started out trying, we actually compiled a list of the exact committee and the date, but then the orders kept changing to where it made our efforts outdated. So we've taken just a more broad brush approach of, while the order's in effect, those subcommittees and boards won't meet until further notice.
Commissioner Ryan here. If the Board of Zoning Appeals, and an item there has no other recourse but the district court, would there be an exception for them to meet if an item warranted?
Well, it certainly it gives me enough discretion to say that a compelling public interest exists. I think what I'd have to do is just look at the zoning, the variance request, and if there's some timeliness to it that necessitated either on the part of the applicant or by law, then we'd try to find a way to proceed. The other concern that I have is just, you've seen, it took us 2 attempts to get this meeting conducted correctly. Trying to do this time and time again with various boards and committees and staff, and imposing on additional staff to set up meetings. And this, heightened format is a little problematic. I think Mr. Bankson might have had something he wanted to add.
Well, Mayor and Commissioners, if it is of interest, part of the structure of this resolution as it relates or remains in effect for so long as the governor's order remains in effect is based upon, and I thought you might be interested in knowing, and I'm reading from the order, it shall become effective immediately, and as you probably saw, the order was effective immediately, but the commencement time, if you will, was 12:01 this afternoon, and shall remain in force until rescinded until May 1, 2020, or until the statewide state of disaster emergency proclaimed on March 12, 2020, related to COVID-19 expires, whichever is earlier. So that's why I thought it best simply to refer to this resolution being in effect as long as the order is in effect, and that remains to be seen.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Commissioner Hodges, I thank you for confirming that staff is keeping an eye on the clock in terms of the time sensitivity of the applications that are before the quasi-judicial boards. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Commissioner Ryan, I move we approve resolution number 2078-24.
Commissioner Davis, second.
Mayor Hoppick, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7824. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. We have no development business. Do we have any other business to come before the commission?
Not really business, but I just saw something today that really touched me. I walked up to Benston's to get my car. I said, I'll just walk up. It's a nice day, so I walked from the hospital up there, and I saw several businesses that were open, not many customers in, but I noticed Robbie's Cheesecake was open, so I said, gosh, when I drive back down, I'm going to stop there. And I was in there, and two guys came in, and through all of this, he's still giving out his free lunch sacks. One guy came in and got 4, another guy came in and got 2, and it's just nice to see that, you know, there is still hope alive, and people committed to the mission are still living that mission despite all that's going on. So if we can individually do something for a neighbor or a friend, 6 feet still gives you a lot of space to smile and help somebody out.
And Mayor Hoppick here, and I know to follow that up, I know the food bank's been short, and I know there's been a lot of people that have stepped forward there. So, as again, we're very, very caring and giving community, and we're thankful for that. So,
Question, this is Commissioner Ryan. Legal staff still working on a lease for the county? Is that on hold, or is that moving along?
This is Mike Sprague. I've pulled him in a lot of other directions, but we have had that conversation.
Still would not be the correct term. And certainly recognize that is, Mr. Sprague and I have had a conversation where he has provided some additional direction, and that is certainly, as of now, I think, until I
We'll
find
see
out
what tomorrow
otherwise,
brings.
at the top of the list.
Thank you.
okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A motion is second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll see you Monday. Are we on for Monday?